For more than 250 years, the British royal family has hidden a truth so uncomfortable that historians still argue over it today. What if I told you the bloodline of modern British royalty may not begin with Europe, but trace us back to Africa? This is about Queen Victoria's grandmother, the woman who shaped the modern monarchy, Queen Charlotte. Historical paintings, court documents, and eyewitness descriptions all show features that don't quite match the version we're taught in textbooks. If this is true, it would mean Britain's imperial identity, built on a foundation of racial hierarchy, was led by a queen with African ancestry. Over time, her portraits were lightened. Descriptions of her appearance disappeared, and the story slowly faded from history. So, was Queen Charlotte black? Historians still debate it, but one thing is certain: history is often written by those in power. Walk into the royal collection today, and you'll find dozens of portraits of Queen Charlotte painted by different artists across different decades. But if you look closer, you'll notice something strange. Something about these portraits just doesn't add up. Look at them side by side. These paintings don't show the same woman. In some, Queen Charlotte has darker skin, fuller lips, and a broader nose, features that many historians describe as distinctly African. But in later portraits, her skin grows lighter, her nose sharper, and her lips thinner. Frame by frame, decade by decade, she begins to look completely European. Now, this wasn't random, and it wasn't just a matter of artistic style. Why? Because the earlier portraits, created closer to her actual lifetime, consistently show one version of her. The later ones, created as the British Empire expanded, show another. This wasn't just happening on canvas either. We have eyewitness records from court doctors, foreign ambassadors, and even entries in royal diaries. Multiple written accounts describe Queen Charlotte with features that the later paintings completely erased. And you have to remember, royal portraits weren't just private art. They were state propaganda. Every single one was approved, curated, and designed to send a very specific message to the world. So, at a time when Britain was justifying its rule over millions of people through a strict racial hierarchy, what would it mean if the Queen herself challenged that very image? What message would her true appearance send? So no, this wasn't a coincidence, and it certainly wasn't artistic freedom. This was image control. This was history being edited right before our eyes. To understand why, we need to go back to Britain's darkest moment. The year is 1761. Britain is on the rise, building a global empire, and its immense wealth is built on one thing: the transatlantic slave trade. It's a brutal, efficient system. Ships sail from Liverpool and Bristol, travel to West Africa, where they steal human beings. These captured people are then sold in the Caribbean and the Americas. The ships return loaded with sugar, cotton, and profits soaked in blood. Don't be mistaken, slavery isn't just a side business. It's the engine of the entire British economy. And it's in this very moment, with the nation's fortunes built on human suffering, that the young King George III makes a choice that will echo through history. He chooseth his bride. Walk into the royal collection today, and you'll find dozens of portraits of Queen Charlotte, painted by different artists across different decades. But if you look closer, something about these portraits just doesn't add up. You see, these paintings don't seem to show the same woman. In some of the earlier portraits, Queen Charlotte has features that historians describe as distinctly African darker skin, fuller lips, and a broader nose. But in the later portraits, her appearance starts to change. Her skin grows lighter, her nose becomes sharper, her lips get thinner. Frame by frame, decade by decade, she begins to look completely European. Now, this wasn't a random shift. It wasn't just a matter of different artistic styles. There's a clear pattern. The portraits created closer to her actual lifetime show one version of her. The ones created later, as the British Empire expanded and solidified its power, show a very different one. And it's not just the paintings. We have written accounts from people who knew her. Court doctors, foreign ambassadors, even entries in royal diaries. Multiple sources describe Queen Charlotte with features that the later paintings seem to erase. You have to remember, royal portraits weren't just private art hanging in a hallway. They were state propaganda. Every detail was approved, curated, and designed to send a very specific message to the world. So, ask yourself this. At a time when Britain ruled millions of people through a strict racial hierarchy, what would it mean if the Queen herself didn't fit neatly into that system? What message would her true appearance send? No, this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't artistic freedom. This was image control, and history, it seems, was edited right before our eyes. Have you ever heard the theory that Queen Charlotte, the wife of King George III, was black? For a long time, this was dismissed as a wild conspiracy theory. But what if I told you the evidence comes from people who knew her personally? People right there in the royal court. When Charlotte first arrived in England from Germany, her appearance caused an immediate stir. The famous writer Sir Walter Scott, who was a contemporary, described her as having a true mulatto face. This wasn't some gossip from a stranger. This was a respected figure of the time making a direct observation. And he wasn't the only one. Charlotte's own personal physician, Baron Stockma, also commented on her features. In his writings, he described her as having a mulatto-like appearance. Think about that for a second. This is the Queen's doctor, someone who saw her up close regularly, using this specific language. It wasn't an insult. It was simply how he described her. The observations didn't stop with her. Years later, Queen Victoria's own doctor took note of the family's physical traits. He wrote about their negroid physiognomy, suggesting that these features were passed down through the generations. Again, these aren't enemies trying to smear the royal family. These are insiders, doctors, and respected members of society. So why isn't this more widely known? Well, history is often shaped by those in power. Words can be buried, and historical records can be conveniently lost or ignored. And perhaps most powerfully, portraits can be changed. If you look at the official portraits of Queen Charlotte, you'll see a range of depictions. Some artists, like Alan Ramsay, seemed to capture her features more faithfully, while later portraits often Europeanized her appearance, lightening her skin and softening her features. Was this a deliberate attempt to whitewash history, to erase a black queen from the British royal narrative? The evidence from her contemporaries is compelling. It forces us to ask what other stories have been hidden from us and what the true face of history really looks like. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that's been hidden in plain sight. A royal secret that could rewrite a huge chunk of history. Let's travel back to the late 1700s. Britain is at a crossroads. The economy is booming, thanks in large part to the brutal system of slavery. But a powerful new idea is taking hold. Abolition. People are starting to question the morality of enslaving other human beings. This wasn't just a philosophical debate. Formerly enslaved black writers, like the incredible Ulaldi Iquiano, were publishing powerful memoirs. They were telling their stories, exposing the horrific reality of the slave trade to the British public. Their words were igniting a movement, and the establishment was getting nervous. The entire economic and social structure built on the backs of enslaved Africans was under threat. So, what did they do? When moral arguments fail, you invent new ones. This is the moment we see the birth of something truly sinister: scientific racism. Prominent thinkers and scientists began publishing theories claiming that black people were not just culturally different, but biologically inferior. They used pseudoscience to create a hierarchy of races, with white Europeans conveniently at the top. This was a deliberate, calculated strategy to justify slavery. It wasn't about economics anymore. It was natural law. But here's where the story takes a fascinating and explosive turn. Imagine you're a powerful figure in Britain, pushing this new ideology of white supremacy. Now, look up at the throne. At the very top of your superior society sits Queen Charlotte. And what if she has African ancestry? All the portraits we see of her today have been, shall we say, European. But earlier descriptions and portraits hint at something different. Historians have traced her lineage back 9 generations to a black branch of the Portuguese royal family. Think about the catastrophic problem this presented. If the Queen herself, the wife of King George III, the matriarch of the royal family, had African roots, the entire foundation of scientific racism would crumble. The lie would be exposed. You can't unclaim one race is inherently inferior when the Queen herself is a descendant of that very race. The hypocrisy would be too glaring to ignore, so they had to erase her. Not literally, of course, but they had to erase her heritage. Over time, her image was softened, her features were changed in official portraits, and her African ancestry was quietly scrubbed from the history books. It was a systematic campaign to hide the truth, because the truth was simply too dangerous to the power structures of the time. It's a powerful reminder of how history is often written by the victors, and how easily inconvenient truths can be buried. What do you guys think about this? Let me know in the comments below. It's a complex piece of history, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Ever heard of the Queen they tried to erase from history? Let's talk about Queen Charlotte. Official portraits try to downplay her features, but other paintings from the time show a different story, a story of clear African ancestry. So, what happened to her bloodline? Well, Charlotte had 15 children, and they didn't just stay in England. They married into royal families all across Europe. This means her descendants are literally everywhere. We're talking about huge names like Queen Victoria, King Edward, the late Queen Elizabeth II, and even King Charles III. Far from disappearing, her heritage didn't just survive, it's multiplied and spread through the most powerful dynasties in the world.
When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle got married, the tabloids went wild. One of the biggest headlines that Meghan was bringing black blood into the royal family. It was framed as this huge, unprecedented event. But what if I told you that was a complete lie? The truth is, black ancestry wasn't a new addition to the British monarchy. It had been there for over 250 years. Let's rewind the clock. Way back to the 18th century to a woman named Queen Charlotte. She was the wife of King George III, you know, the one from the American Revolution. Charlotte was a German princess, but her family tree had some fascinating roots. Historians have traced her lineage back 9 generations to Margarita de Castro y Souza, a 15th century Portuguese noblewoman. And here's the kicker. Margarita's ancestry traces back to the 13th century ruler, Alfonso III, and his lover Madrigana, who was of Moorish and therefore North African descent. That's right, the British royal family had a black ancestor centuries before Meghan Markle was even born. So why did no one ever talk about this? Well, portraits of Queen Charlotte often show her with distinctly African features. Some art historians even argue that painters were specifically instructed to downplay these features to fit the free European beauty standards of the time. But if you look closely at portraits by artists like Alan Ramsey, you can see the features that contemporary descriptions mentioned. They called her mulatto-faced and noted her true mulatto face. The story of Queen Charlotte was quietly swept under the rug of history. It didn't fit the neat, tidy, and very white narrative that the monarchy wanted to project. So, when the media frenzy erupted over Meghan Markle, it was based on a massive historical blind spot. They treated her as an outsider, a disruptor bringing something completely new to the table. But in reality, she was walking a path that had been paved and then forgotten centuries earlier. The irony is staggering. The very institution that was being disrupted by Meghan's heritage was the same one that had a black queen on the throne for nearly 60 years. This isn't just a fun fact. It completely reframes the entire conversation about race and the royal family. It shows how history can be selectively remembered and conveniently forgotten to maintain a certain image. But Meghan wasn't bringing black blood into the family. She was simply reminding everyone of the blood that was already there. Ever wondered why the story of Queen Charlotte is so captivating? It's because her life reveals a powerful truth that history often tries to hide. It shows us that race isn't about biology, it's about politics. Think about it. The same African ancestry that was used as a justification to enslave millions of people was also present in the woman sitting on the throne of the very empire that built its wealth on that system. Her story forces us to confront this massive contradiction. It challenges everything we've been taught about race, power, and history. So, who was the last Black Queen of England? It's a question that sounds like it has a simple answer, but the truth is far more complicated and, honestly, a lot darker. If we're being incredibly technical, the last Queen of England was Queen Elizabeth II, but that's not the real story, is it? We're talking about a legacy that has been systematically erased, a history that has been whitewashed. The real, shattering answer is that there was never a last one. Why? Because they never truly admitted the first. Think about Queen Charlotte. The wife of King George III, her African ancestry was openly discussed during her lifetime. Yet today, she is almost exclusively portrayed as white. Her story and the stories of others like her have been pushed into the shadows, rewritten to fit a narrative that excludes blackness from the highest école préparation of power. This isn't just an oversight, it's a deliberate act of historical erasure. It's easier to pretend something never existed than to confront the uncomfortable truths it represents. So, the concept of a last Black Queen is a trick question. It implies an ending to something that was never allowed to have a proper beginning in our history books. The powerful have always understood that controlling the past is the key to controlling the present and the future. They built their power on the foundation of forgetting, on silencing the voices and erasing the faces that didn't fit their story. If history like this matters to you, if you believe that these stories they tried so desperately to erase deserve to be told, then make sure you subscribe. Because power survives when we forget. And the truth, the real unfiltered truth, survives only when we refuse to let it be buried. Let's keep these stories alive together. Thanks for watching.